So the fact is, when someone dies, your unconscious death urge gets activated. And I'll talk about that, but I just want to review what's in the unconscious death urge. There's several parts. The first thing is the thought, I'm separate from God. Then there's the personal lie. And then there's the thought, death is inevitable. Those three things alone can kill you. So they are really powerful in the death urge. Also, you're programming from religion and society about death. Especially if they told you were a sinner. And the Course in Miracles says that the belief in sin is a request for death. Now, you may not have been told you were a sinner in this life, but maybe the last 5 lifetimes you were a Catholic. You have to go back and clear 5 lifetimes of religious conditioning. So a lot of us, even though we may have not been told we're a sinner in this life, we could have brought in that thought from another lifetime. And the belief in sin is a request for death, it says in the Course. Another part of the unconscious death urge is our family patterns on disease and death. And what did your ancestors die of and what conditions? And you need to review that and choose not to go in agreement. Also, part of your death urges are addictions and bad habits. You already know that. And, false religious theology. I think I mentioned that. Past life memories of dying. So we died in all these lifetimes. So I've been saying lately that death is an addiction. I never used to say that, but I see that now. Well, any anti-life thoughts are part of your death urge. But the one thing I want you to get, that your secret wish to die because you hate your life, now that's an obvious part of your death urge if you have a secret wish to die, of course. Okay, so what I want to talk about at the beginning here is when a family member dies, or a friend, or even a pet, somebody you're close to dies, this triggers these parts of the unconscious death urge. And I'll give you an example. So my father died when I just turned 17. When I saw him in the casket, I developed a severe pain in my body, and I had it for 13 years. Nobody could help me until I got to rebirthing. After 2 or 3 sessions, it disappeared forever. So you can see why I became a rebirther. So that's how my death urge bothered me at the beginning, was a severe pain. Well, then later my sister died. Now, she was a conformist, so she died the same exact age as my father, 51. It helps to be a rebel. So when I was 51, I had to be careful, but fortunately I wasn't a conformist. Okay, well, then my sister died, and then I saw her. She had a black aura around her, and I tried to give her a list of people that had healed her type of cancer, and she wouldn't even take the list. So I couldn't help her. Well, after she died, my death urge came up again, and I got acute hypothermia. I was absolutely freezing. And I knew it was my death urge, and I really had trouble with that. Nobody could help me with that. And I was so cold that I would walk in a room and the heat would turn to cold, air conditioning. And the hot water would turn to cold water. Literally, that's how strong it was. And it took me a long time to get over that. Then I recovered from that. And then my mother died. Now, when your mother dies, it's very, very genetic. And, I think that's the hardest one to deal with. So when my mother died, 1 year to the day she died, 1 year later, I was in Berlin. I was in the hotel. I picked up my fork and I could not put the food in my mouth. And I had acute, sudden, anorexia. I couldn't eat a thing. And then I had insomnia, and then I had a depression. Now, depression is always the death urge, and of course I knew that. But it was so up. I really had to stop working at that point. I was kind of weak. And that took me a long time to get over. And only by the grace of Babaji did I get through that. He really helped me. So I was praying constantly. But the thing you need to know is the death urge keeps out the love that would heal it. I think this is very important you understand that. When your death urge is up, what's going to heal you is love, but the death urge is so strong it keeps out the love. So this is a trap. So a lot of people, even though they might know that rebirthing would heal them of their death urge, they avoid it because the death urge keeps out the love that would heal it. So my mind was doing that at the beginning. I was not letting anyone heal me, and it was really bad. And I called this clairvoyant, and she said, "You're on the fence." I knew what she meant, that I hadn't decided what I was going to do with this. So that night I said to Babaji, okay, it was midnight 1999, and that was when the computer glitch was going to happen. Yeah. And so what happened was I prayed and I said, okay, Babaji, I don't know what to do, but I choose to live. That's what I had to say out loud. And then that night he appeared to me, and he was wearing white, and he was in a white room. And it was white. It was a library, white shelves, white books, white pages. He's wearing white. He pulled off a book. And I'm not a visual person. I don't usually see Babaji, but this was the miracle I had. And he opened this book, and it was a picture of the brain. And suddenly this brain became alive, and, it began to grow. So he was saying, even this, you can change your brain. And so the next day I started doing spiritual practices like crazy, and I finally came out of it with the help of him and with Amaji. So that's how I got through the worst one, was my mother's death. Well, then I got over that, and then recently Marcus's brother-in-law died, and we got into that whole thing. Now this time I didn't get any sickness. I just got tension, which is still the death urge, but at least I didn't get sick, so I'm doing better. But I kind of lost my certainty, I think, about physical immortality. So I used to have a lot of certainty on that subject. My mother said, well, I don't think you should be so certain about that topic. And I said, Mother, if I'm not certain, I won't make it. So I was very certain. Well, I noticed that this time I lost some certainty. So I'm working on that again. So every time someone dies you're close to, and then your unconscious death urge gets activated, and it's hard. And I feel like I've gone through so many activations with all these deaths in my family that, now after everyone's gone, maybe finally I can start really living. So Leonard used to say, you can't really enter physical immortality till your parents have died. And now I understand that, because when your parents die, you have to process all this death urge. And if they haven't died, you probably haven't processed it all. So the gift of someone's death is your death urge comes up and you have to process it. But the main point I want to say is death keeps out the love that would heal it. So you tend to avoid the thing that will help you heal your death urge if you don't wash out. Fortunately, I figured that point out. By a miracle, I figured that out, that I was avoiding the very thing that could heal me. And that's when I finally reached out to Babaji and told him I desperately need help. So I just want you to be aware of that point. Another thing I want to say about the death urge. I want to make this comment. The way I got out of all these different deaths and activations was spiritual intervention. I could not have made it. Every single time my death urge was activated after a family member, the only way I got out of it was spiritual intervention. Either God came and helped me, or I chose to get spiritual help, or whatever, or both ways. I just want to make that point. When your death urge is up, you need spiritual intervention. And you need to read the Course in Miracles. You need to get rebirth. You need to be around people that are really alive, and do whatever it is that increases your life urge. I had been depressed, which I knew it was my death urge. And one day my rebirther said, suicide is not an option. I thought, I can't believe she's saying that to me. And she's right. If you commit suicide, then you're going to have to reincarnate so many more times, and so Of course, all death is suicide in a way, but if you commit conscious suicide, you're going to be in more trouble. So that's not an option. And I just had to live through it. Well, anyway, somebody drove me to Amaji, one of my friends. 20 miles from the hotel, I felt her aura. And I said, oh my God, my death urge my depression is lifting. And then I got in line, I got hugged by her, and it was over. So in both of my worst cases, Amaji and Babaji and Jesus helped me. And I allowed myself to have a deep spiritual intervention. So that's the main point I want to tell you is you have to go for what works, and what works is a deep spiritual intervention. Another thing I want to say, I'm teaching a healing seminar with Marcus right now. We wrote this book, Revolutionary Spiritual Healing. And the point I'm trying to get across to people is all healing is temporary until you heal death. So we could teach you how to heal anything, like cancer. Cancer is a battle between the life urge and the death urge, and the cells are confused. They don't know which way you're going. If your life urge gets stronger than your death urge, you can survive the cancer. If your death urge is stronger than your life urge, you won't survive the cancer. Well, so let's say you got through the cancer and you healed yourself. Well, if you don't heal your death urge, you'll just make up a new way to kill yourself. That's the point I'm making. All healing is temporary until you heal death. So I'm always telling people to work on their death urge and, do it when you're healthy. Now, I remember when I first got into rebirthing, and I was living with Leonard at the beginning of rebirthing, and he was teaching physical immortality, and I said, this is it. I want that. And, there was very few books on it at the time, very few books. So I said, I'm going to review the books, and I'm going to write a chapter in Rebirthing in the New Age, chapter 6, on physical immortality, because rebirthers have to understand this. I did that, but I locked myself in a room. I started writing this book, and I got acute arthritis. Really, I honestly did. And I started aging. I was kind of young then, and I was hysterical. I ran into Leonard's room and I said, I've got arthritis. I thought I could have a brilliant writing career. And he said, oh, this is great. I said, what do you mean this is great? What do you mean? He said, now you're going through your old age early when you're strong enough to process it. Oh, I said, fantastic. I immediately got it. And I think only another person who understands physical immortality could have gotten me through that moment. So it's good to go through your death urge when you're younger. That's the point, which I tried to do a lot of it early in my life and that's the blessing I had by going through all these deaths. I was strong enough at that time to process it. What most people do is they keep their death urge suppressed until they're really old, and then it all comes up and they're too weak to process it. So it kills them,
Other people die and activate them.
What?
Other people die and activate them.
Other people die and who are their friends, and then they get activated in their death urge, and then they don't have any way to clear it. See, most people don't clear it when they're young. So I guess I was lucky that I started clearing my death urge when I was 17. And then we wrote a book, Physical Immortality, Marcus and I, How to Overcome Death. We have that book.
It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. And even if you understand the concept of physical immortality, you need to read the books on it, because you need to immerse yourself in the philosophy, the psychology, and the physiology of it. And in the back of that book, we list all the different books on that topic, which, I spent a lot of time getting those together. You're not going to find that list anywhere else. I worked on that a lot to get down all the different books on that topic. So they're all listed in the back. And what we did at the beginning of Rebirthing is we read nothing but books on physical immortality for one whole year. We had to, because we were pioneers and we were going out teaching this outrageous idea called rebirthing that nobody heard of. We had to be strong. So those of us who were the first 10 rebirthers, we read every week, we'd read a book on physical immortality, and then we'd teach it to each other. For a whole year we did that. And that really helped me, but even with that knowledge, I went through a lot of different death urges that surfaced. But I was strong enough to handle them because I had that background. Well, okay. People think they get sick and then they age and then they die. What really they do is they die in their mind first, and that causes sickness, and that causes death. So most people think death is inevitable is not a thought. They don't get that it's a thought. Everybody says, "Oh, I know death is inevitable." So they don't even question it because they think it's real. Well, that's a thought you could change. But most people, they don't get that. They don't get that. The other problem is people want to die because they think they're going to go to a better place. I covered this last week and the week before a little bit. People think, well, I'm going to die because then I'll be really happy. I'll be in bliss. I'll be in heaven and I won't have any problems. It doesn't work like that. When you drop your body, consciousness seeks its own level, and then you have to reincarnate to try to do better next time. So the goal is to become enlightened in this life so you don't have to keep dying and reincarnating. I hope you get the point that all death is suicide, but most people are unconsciously killing themselves. I mean, conscious suicide is very bad karma, but that's my point. But unconscious suicide is what most people are doing. They don't realize they're killing themselves with their thoughts. And their subconscious is running them. That's why, and they don't do breathing, so they don't even know what's in their subconscious. Now, of course, you have to give up your anger. You have to give up your guilt. Today we were talking about anger in this group, and they got really into defending it. It was very interesting. They said, yeah, but anger is this, and anger, it's good to express your anger, it's good to feel your anger, it's good. And they were all defending it. And I said, you guys are defending anger instead of letting it go. And I really had to stay on that point. But anger is very destructive, and it's one of the things that can cause your death. Guilt is really bad for you, and guilt demands punishment, and the way you punish yourself is by killing yourself. That would be the ultimate punishment. And the problem with guilt is, according to the Course in Miracles, it's very tough. You have to really be clear to give up your guilt, because the ego is going to tell you, if you dare think you're innocent, then you're really guilty. So the ego tries to trick you into thinking you don't dare give up your guilt. And the Course in Miracles says you have to go through that block. You have to pass through that, and you have to understand that. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about is death is a stronghold of all fear. Now, people have all kinds of fears. I never felt a lot of fear, but later I figured out that if there's only love or fear, then anything in my body that was not love was part of my fear. So if I had a sickness or anorexia or whatever, that was fear. I just didn't feel the fear because I was acting the fear out in the form of an illness. So what most people do is they're too afraid to feel their fear. It's too scary. So their fear actually gets acted out in the form of a pain or an illness. You do have to handle your fear. Death is a stronghold of all fear. If I was working with you in a private session and I processed you down what's below this fear, below that fear, and if I took you down what's below that fear, the bottom line would always be death. So when you pull out the death urge and breathe it out, your fear starts collapsing. And you have less and less fear. The more you give up your death urge, the less fear you have. Of course, the less fear you have, the better you're going to feel, the more happy you're going to feel, and the more health you're going to have. Of course, what we want to do is breathe out the fear on the exhale. When you're feeling fear, you need to lie down and breathe and exhale the fear. Inhale love and exhale the fear. And I just want to say that a lot of us have a fear of healing because we're not used to miracles. Everybody wants a miracle. I have this condition, I want a miracle. No, people are too afraid of miracles because it's too unfamiliar. So you need to pray for release of the fear of the miracle. Okay, so I'm going to close on that point. All right, you guys, thanks for being here. And next week, we're going to talk more about spiritual healing.